Hello everyone, my name's Cliff and welcome back to my channel. This is Cliff's Dark Gems. Today I'm going to be doing a wrap up of all the books that I've read in the month of March, and I'm just going to be looking ahead into the month of April with Old School April. Stay tuned. Okay everyone, I've had a great month of reading, even though I've only read 7 out of 10 of the books on my TBR. Those books that I've read have been really massive. For example, Stephen King's Dumakee, which is close to 700 pages, and Perdido Street Station, which is close to 900 pages. So I've done actually a pretty good job this month. Now, I'm not going to talk about all the books in a lot of detail because I've done most of them already. I've done a review on 5 out of the 7, but I will rank them and I will give them stars according to how I felt about the stories and how much I liked them. So yeah, without further ado, let's go into the books. In 7th place we have Ed McBain's Killer's Choice. Now I was supposed to read Killer's Choice and Killer's Payoff this month. I decided to just read the one. I think this month I'm going to give it a break. Although I really did enjoy this. I still only gave it 3 stars. I think it's probably the weakest of the ones I've read so far. The weakest entry in the 87th precinct. I did enjoy the story. I think I spoke about it briefly, about this woman who gets murdered. But the plot was just not as engaging as the other ones that I've read before this. The writing is still often magical. You get really immersed into the city and the world. The characters are very well rounded. You grow to care about them. And one thing I really enjoyed about this is that there's a new detective, Cotton Hawes, and he's actually a new addition to the force. And I'm also very happy to see the back of another detective who was a bit of an arsehole. He used to basically hit suspects first and then ask questions later, and he was murdered in this one. And I get the feeling that there's going to be a lot of deaths of the detectives and the police force throughout this whole series, because it is a rather dangerous precinct to live in. Oh, by the way, and the fact that this guy got murdered is not so much a spoiler. It really does happen right at the beginning of this short little book. But as I say, Cotton Hawes is an awesome addition to the police force. That is Killer's Choice. 3 out of 5. In 6th place we also have a 3-star read, which I really felt kind of disappointed. I think this could have been such a great novel, and I'll explain why shortly, but that is Stephen King's Dumakee. Now, just a quick run through on the basic plot. You have the character Edgar Fremantle, who's a very rich man with a beautiful family, and he owns a building construction company, and he suffers a terrible accident where he loses his right arm. He gets some kind of brain damage, and basically which sets him off on these crazy rages. At one time he actually tries to throttle his wife to death. So he's a broken man. This accident has really hurt him, and his wife leaves him. He becomes suicidal. The psychiatrist that's helping him, the psychologist that's helping him, suggests that he goes on a break to heal and mend his body and his soul. And he ends up in this place on this beautiful stretch of Florida coastline called Dumakee, which is surprisingly underdeveloped, and he settles there in a little house with the waves lapping up onto the sand, and it's really a beautiful setting. Now, the first half of the novel for me was actually brilliant. Wonderful writing. As I say, the setting was just superb. You really get a sense of this coastline, this beautiful tropical beach with the waves lapping up, and there's these shells underneath his property he's staying in that make the sound at night like it's practically crackling at night. And Stephen King does superbly well with describing the setting. I also enjoyed most of the characters. Edgar himself, just his portrayal as this broken man that needs to be fixed mentally and emotionally. He takes up a hobby, painting, and this seems to help quite a lot with his mental state. He also develops a bit of a serious ability with his painting, but we can see, and this is where the creepiness comes in the first half of the novel, that this is not necessarily him with the talent with the painting. And when he does paint, strange things start to happen. In terms of the other characters, there's some that I enjoyed, like Wireman, who he befriends, who's just down a little bit down the beach, and there's this old lady. But Wireman is an interesting character because he's also broken. He's also had trauma in his life. One thing that really irritated me about him though was that he says these things like in Spanish, and it just got really cringeworthy and irritating sometimes. That, but he was a likable character, and the two of them become good buddies as well. Some of the other characters, like Edgar's family, I didn't really care for very much, but still, the first half of the novel is beautifully written, and I really enjoyed what was going on there. Unfortunately, that's where it ends. When Stephen King tries to take this creepiness, the supernatural aspect, and in the last third of the novel in particular, he tries to turn it into full-out horror, it kind of fell flat for me. It's almost like the story didn't know where it was going. It was like, was he writing some kind of literary piece, or was he writing an old school horror? And he kind of almost got caught in between, and that's where I found it a little bit disappointing. It was good enough to read right to the end, and I enjoyed it, but I really expected so much more from the second half of the novel than what I got. So the supernatural aspect, as I said, just fell flat for me. That is Stephen King, Dumakee. Okay, at number 5 we have Zombie by Slade. Now, I've already spoken about this book, I wouldn't say at length, so I'm not going to go too much into the plot, but I really did enjoy this one. I gave it 3.5 stars out of 5. It has a very intricate plot, as I mentioned in my other video. You can look back on those videos. That is all these different plot lines. It gets very exciting, it builds towards a great climax. But my biggest problem with it was that there was a big focus on Southern Africa and colonialism, and a huge part of the story throughout the novel, even though this is an important part of the story, it could have been trimmed down a bit. And I think if it had been edited a bit, it could have made for a more focused, terrifying, exciting story, and it probably would have gone up to even 4 or 5 stars for me. That is Zombie by Slade. In 4th spot we have Famine by Masterton. Now, this is a post-apocalyptic tale, but I wouldn't call it so much post-apocalyptic, it's more apocalyptic. It's more really the downfall of American society. It starts off where there's wheat field in, I think, Nebraska. There's a farmer, and Ed, that's our main protagonist, and his farm is suffering. His crops are dying out, and they cannot pinpoint what is happening here. It's not a normal disease, and they're dying out at a rapid rate. He's losing acre after acre. And you find out that it's not just an isolated area, that other farmers in the same area are also suffering from the same disease or the same affliction to their crops. And later on in the novel, you find out that it's not just limited to one part of the nation, but it's nationwide. Now, the interesting thing about the story, it really is only focused on America. It's not the world. And something is happening. And I'm not going to give any spoilers away, because it really does go from bad to worse as more and more of the country's food is being basically spoiled, and the crops are vanishing and people are left with nothing to eat. Another thing I found really interesting about this novel was that everything was going to shit basically. There's all this political interference. There's this big greedy senator, big literally, and he really just wants to line his pockets with gold at the expense of, he basically uses this food shortage and this disaster as a means to make money for himself. And there's also bureaucracy. I mean, the one part of the country doesn't know what's happening with the other part of the country. Even the president doesn't know. That's not really, these may be minor spoilers, but not really. And it really does go downhill. And this novel explores the depths of where humanity goes. It's not a supernatural horror, it's a human horror, and what people would do and how they just disintegrate as human beings. And it's fascinating. I really enjoyed it, but I just felt that towards the end I just wanted to know what else happened. It kind of finished and it's almost like it could use a sequel. So yeah, it could have been so much more. Just another thing about this novel is that I'm starting to notice with Graham Masterton, but in particular with this novel, that some of the sex scenes are just absolutely ridiculous. Now, Ed, who, as I said, is the main protagonist, is having marriage problems right at the beginning of the novel. And his wife does not like the life of a farmer. And she wants to go back to the city. She wants to go live with her sister to find herself, to find if the marriage is going to work or not. As soon as she leaves and she goes back, Ed has this affair, just this, like straight away, with this other woman who is there with him. And she kind of does the same thing. And the sex is ridiculous, and just the whole idea is just crazy to me. And later on there's this sort of a rape scene and some nasty scenes that, yeah, it's one thing that he doesn't write very well or very realistically. And I just want to point that out to you as well. But all in all, it's not a bad book, and I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. That's Famine. And now we're coming to the top 3. And in third place, and now these are all 4 or 5 stars. In third place, and very surprisingly for me, is Slugs. Now this was a crazy, kind of stupid, but really fun, gory, bloody ride. And as I said in a previous video, it's not the best writing in the world. In fact, some of his writing leaves a lot to be desired. But actual story is engaging. The death scenes are really creative, and I actually really enjoyed this book. It was a quick, easy read. It's not too complicated. It's just your typical 80s animal creature, animal feature horror, animal attack horror. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. And this is in third place, and this gets 4 stars in my book. And in second place we have Perdido Street Station. Now, I read this massive book as part of the the Week of Weird readathon, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I feel a little guilty that I didn't perhaps read a bit more for that week, but if it wasn't for that readathon, I would never have picked this book up. It's not really the kind of book that I would normally read. It's a weird mixture of science fiction, fantasy, horror, and it really is strange. But I'm so glad I did, because it is wonderful. The city in which it takes place is like this living, breathing character in itself, and it's filled with all these wonderful, weird creatures, human and otherwise. And I did actually write a full review. I did give a full review on my channel. So if you look back in my archives, you'll find everything about this book. And I definitely gave it 4 out of 5 stars. But it's well worth picking up. And I'm going to try and read a bit more of Chine in the future as well. That is Perdido Street Station. And in first place in the month of March was Necroscope by Brian Lumley. Now, I also spoke at length about this book, so you need to go back if you want to see the review. But this was wonderful, and I cannot wait to sink my teeth into the rest of the series. And at first glance, this first part of the series seems like it's all about vampires. But, as I've said before, it's not. It's about a necroscope who sucks the secrets out of the dead, who basically rips them up, and Necromancer, got that wrong, it's okay, Necromancer who rips out the secrets of the dead, and a Necroscope who can talk to the dead. And these two men are on a collision course. As it really is a good versus evil. I'm not going to say anything more about it. I've said enough about it on my channel, but this is well worth a read. I thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I'm looking forward to reading more of this series. That is Necroscope by Brian Lumley. Okay everyone, that's the month of March done and dusted. Now I can look forward to April, the old school April readathon, and put in all my energy and time into reading some more wonderful horror novels and watching some horror movies and all sorts of other weird and wonderful things that we have to do for this particular event. It is a team event. I am part of the Silver Snakes, so go Snakes, go! And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this month. So in the meantime, keep those pages turning, take care of yourselves, cheers.